We come together today not to lament about our condition, for it is clear to us what that state is. Rather, we come together today to forge new initiatives, new relationships, explore new paradigms, to offer constructive solutions to the conditions and pathologies that we find in our community. We may differ on the approach that we may embrace or use, but let us not differ on the objective, and that is to liberate our people. We must keep our eye on the prize. We must not falter along the way. Let us recreate a stable family to bring about new hope and opportunities, to liberate our people from the shackles of economic insufficiency. For every country understands that there is a direct correlation and relationship between the quality and level of education and the economic development of the community. So we come together today to explore how we may accomplish these matters. So put on your thinking cap. Let us have a productive day, and again, welcome to the great Medgar Evers College.
Thank you very much, President Jackson, and I know that you all must feel as I do. You do feel welcome here at Medgar Evers because you're part of our family. And President Jackson has opened the doors of this college to the community, and we think of everyone who comes to Medgar as a part of the Medgar Evers College family. So you are indeed welcome, and we appreciate your being here with us today. To continue with the program now, we'd like to bring to you Dr. Vernal Gordon-Cave, who will bring you the chairman's remarks on behalf of the African American Leadership Summit. Dr. Cave.
Thank you very much. Dr. Jackson, you are indeed right when you say that we are at present in the great Medgar Evers College. But it is so also because we have a great president, Dr. Edison Jackson. And on behalf of the African American Summit, Leadership Summit, I want to express our thanks and appreciation when, after our first meeting, Dr. Jackson let it be known that we were welcome. And so we're here today to continue a struggle which started a long, long time ago when some of our ancestors were brought across the Atlantic Ocean to make America and all of this part of the world a happy place for them with our labor. We continue the struggle. What we are doing now is just working on moving forward to some time or other reaching some kind of parity. It's a long struggle, but we intend, as our predecessors have done, to stay with it. You're going to hear from some very informed people today, and it is my privilege now to introduce to you a longtime friend, one of our really distinguished citizens, Congressman Ed Towns. Came to know him first when he was borough president, and followed his career, and I've watched the things that he has done for the advancement of the African American portion of our great nation. He is now moving up into more and more powerful positions in the Congress so that he is better able to influence legislation which will advance the cause of the common man, and in so doing, advance the cause of African Americans. He sits today on the Energy and Commerce Committee, on the Subcommittee on Health, on the Government Operations Committee, and he chairs the Human Resources Committee. Last year, somebody decided to challenge him and asked him to move over. But from north and south and east and west, they came together and he scored a tremendous victory. I don't believe anybody is going to spend a great deal of money to try to move out Ed Towns. It is my privilege and your privilege to hear Congressman Ed Towns.
Thank you very much, Dr. K, for those very kind words. It's always good to have something nice said about you when you're involved in the political arena. So, Dr. K, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Also, let me give thanks to Steve Davis for bringing us together. And of course, Steve, we want to let you know that we appreciate this, and it's something that is definitely needed. I also like to thank Dr. Jackson for opening the doors of Medgar College and allowing all of us to come in. Medgar is a very important institution in our community, and those of us that live in Brooklyn should never forget that. So give Medgar and Dr. Jackson another round of applause. And to our elected officials, and to, of course, our keynote speaker, Brother Eady, and to all of you that are assembled here, I'm delighted to come and to be a part of this great day. The Clinton administration economic recovery plan will mean very little to our community if we're not prepared to take the advantage of the situation. I know that many of us have sort of reached the point where we want to give up. After 8 years of Ronald Reagan and 4 years of Bush, we just basically feel that nothing will ever happen for us again. An administration that told us that catch up to our children, looked them dead in the eye and said to them, look, ketchup is a vegetable. Well, I lived in North Carolina for 13 years. I got enough sense to know that if ketchup is a vegetable, grits has got to be a dessert. But we can't listen to that. We must now rise up, and when the doors of opportunity open with this administration, and I do believe they're going to open, that we have to be prepared to walk through. And I think that occasions like this make it right for us to be able to come through. I think that we cannot get involved in the squabbling. I think that we have to look at a new strategy. We have to, if we're going to demonstrate, as we demonstrate in front of that store, we have to talk about a plan while we walk in front of that store. Because we can't close that store that we don't own and make it impossible for our grandmother to be able to go get the goods. We have to make certain that we open our own stores if we close down the store in our neighborhood. We also have to make certain that pension plans, pension money, it has to be utilized in our communities. Let's face it, in this country alone, $400 billion, and that's B as in boy, comes from us, the minority community. Well, if they can build the harbor in Baltimore and the seaport over in Manhattan, I'm telling you now that they can put some of that money in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brownsville, Flatbush, East New York, and areas where we live as well. So this is what this is all about this morning, economic development. I do believe that if Martin Luther King was here today, I do believe that if Marcus Garvey was here today, I do believe that Fannie Lou Hamer was here today, I think they would talk a little bit about economic development. I think that would be the subject that they would deal with today. So we have to make certain that we do not lose sight of economic development. And let me close on this note, that we have to recognize that there is a correlation between unemployment and going to jail. We have to recognize that. So if we want to make certain that our children are able to stay out of these institutions, then we have to make certain that we provide jobs for them to make certain that they have an opportunity to work. It's hard for a kid to go to college and to be able to learn when they know that when they finish learning that they can't come out and earn. That is very frustrating for them, and we need to understand that. So I come this morning to say to you that economic development is the way to go. That in this country, right, how we can get ready so that when that door swings open, that we are prepared to walk through with our proposal and to say to them that, look, we know what needs to be done in our community because the research has already been done. We know how many hamburgers we eat. We know how many potato chips we eat. We know how many Coca-Colas and Pepsi-Colas we drink. So all we need now is an opportunity to be able to perform. Thank you, Steve, for bringing us together to talk about economic development.
I'd like now to recognize some of the special guests who are with us today. And if I neglect to mention someone's name, please forgive us. Our list is incomplete. And as additional people arrive, we will let you know who they are so that you too may greet them at the appropriate time. I'd first like to recognize the Honorable Lenora Fulani, who is here with us today. The Honorable Una Clark, from whom you will be hearing later today. The Honorable Priscilla Wooten, you will also be hearing from Councilwoman Williamson later today. Regina Hillary, President of AGGEE. Okay. The NAACP Youth Committee, are you here? Would you stand? And Mr. Bill Waters, MCM Corporation. We welcome all of you. We are very pleased to have you with us today. To continue with the program now, according to our program, we had hoped that the Honorable Mayor David N. Dinkins would be with us at this time. He is not. And so to bring remarks on behalf of the mayor, we have the Honorable Wallace Ford.
When I speak on behalf of the mayor on a number of occasions, I have opportunity to be in a number of our churches, and you know in church we get a call and response, and if I don't get that, it throws my entire rhythm pattern off, and I've got to give a much longer speech here. So I'll try it again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, thank you. It certainly is a privilege and a pleasure as your Commissioner of the Department of Business Services, the department which is responsible for a significant part of the economic development activity that takes place in the city of New York. It's my privilege and pleasure to be here on behalf of the 106th Mayor of the city of New York, David Dinkins. If the Mayor were here today, I know he would want me to convey a couple of things, and briefly, because I know we have a very long program and a very important program. But there's 3 points that I think it's extremely useful to make mention of within the context of this summit. First of all, we have to look at the issue of using history as a tool. We look at the fact that we look at the facts of our history in this country, our history before we came to this country, and many people will use that history and our experiences as a reason for despair. They will look at our history and say, these are the reasons why we cannot do things today. These are the reasons why we're in the conditions that we are today. These are the reasons why we have so many problems. I would suggest to you, though, ladies and gentlemen, that there's more to that in our history because it really is a basis for progress. We are not victims. We have never been victims. We were not born to be victims. That is not part of our heritage. That is not where we are. That is not where we're going. We have to absolutely reject the notion of looking at ourselves as victims as a matter of course, because throughout history, we have our achievements. We have our achievements that we must celebrate. We have our achievements that we must point out. We most of all have to look at the fact that we indeed are the sons and daughters of people who prevailed over the Middle Passage. We are the sons and daughters of the people who did indeed prevail over slavery. We are the sons and daughters of the people who prevailed over the absolute disappointment that came about at the end of Reconstruction. And we are the sons and daughters of people who, as we go into the 21st century, stand at the threshold of great achievement if we will seize that opportunity. And I do believe we have the capability of seizing that opportunity. I would not stand here in this summit and suggest that we do not have our challenges, we do not have our problems in our community. Of course we do. But I'm also here, I will stand here and say that we have the capacity to do something about them. We have the capacity to address those challenges. We have the capacity to address those problems. We have a way of going forward. It's already been mentioned in the comments that we are indeed seeing as a part of the liberation movement, if you will, of African Americans in these United States of America, that we are looking at economic development. That's not, of course, something that just came about in 1993. We have to understand that throughout our history, we have indeed seen comments, we have seen movements with respect to the issue of economic development, but quite frankly, it has been a missing component over the last 20 to 30 years as part of our overall agenda in moving forward. Economic development in these United States of America has to be a part of our liberation strategy. And I use that term purposely, a liberation strategy, that we have to have a plan. We have to make some decisions as to where we want to go, set some goals, set some objectives, and go there. It is not enough to say we want it to be better. It is not enough to say we don't want it the way it is right now. We have to say something more. We have to say where we're going to go. If economic development is going to be a part of that process, what resources do we have? We spend over $300 billion a year in this country. We spend it on shoes, we spend it on cars, we spend it on liquor, we spend it on cigarettes, we spend it on any number of consumer goods. We are some of the greatest consumers in the world. We should never think, I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the entire answer, the total answer, is going to come from the government in Washington, from the government in Albany, or even the government here in New York City, because government-based economic development is not going to be enough to sustain the kind of growth, to sustain the type of activity, to sustain the movement that we need, and particularly when we have the capability to control our own destiny. We have the capability of doing something with what we have if we will summon the will to do it. And I'm telling you that we have the ability to do that. We, again, as I said before, are the sons and daughters of people who have prevailed. They didn't just survive, they prevailed over tremendous odds, tremendous circumstances, tremendous adversity, and here we stand in 1993 with the capability of doing something, because we say, what can we do with what we have? And understand that there is indeed a connection between the economic development and the political process. Right? Because when we talk about what we have a capability of doing, we have dollars in our hands that we can do something with. We also have a vote in our hand that we can do something with, but we have to decide what's important to us. People will come to us all the time in the communities where African Americans live and say to us that when we talk about economic development, for us, we talk about jobs. All right? I'm here to tell you that I reject that notion. All right? I reject the notion of speaking to us solely about jobs, because we have to understand where jobs come from. Jobs come from businesses that have a capability of meeting a payroll every week, every 2 weeks, that are functioning, profitable, productive, progressive businesses. And who are those business owners, or who will those business owners be? There's no problem and there's no shame in being an employee, but there's also some great pride in being an employer, a manager, an owner, an investor. And we have to start thinking in those terms ourselves, so that when we talk about economic development for us, we don't want just the job. We don't want to just be the employee and draw the check. We also want to be the owner. We want to be the manager. We want to be somebody who is in charge, right? To do that, of course, we've got to summon our own resources. We have to look upon whatever strategies people bring to us, whether it's from the city government or the state government, the federal government, say, how is this designed to build up the number of business owners? How is this designed to build up the number of managers? How is this designed to build up the base, the economic base within our community, so we don't just become the drawers of water and the hewers of wood. We always have been able to tote, and we've always been able to carry. We've always been able to be the employee, but we want to be the employers also. We want to be the managers. We want to be the people who are part of the process of being in charge. And I speak of that because we look at one of the ways that government can indeed be helpful is you look at all the billions of dollars that government spends at the city level, at the state level, at the federal level, and I'm telling you because the Department of Business Services is part of the process within this administration, which is looking to fundamentally change the way that the city of New York does its business. The city of New York, in the past, has basically taken on an approach which has been sexually biased, has been racially biased, and which has seen to it that by and large people of color and women do not participate in the business activity of the city of New York. And we had a mayor, and I won't call his name, but we had a mayor who was going around saying, how am I doing? And the question was, what are you doing? And what he was doing was keeping his shoulder up against the door of opportunity. And while in Atlanta, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, in Philadelphia, in Washington, D.C., even the home of David Dukes, the state of Louisiana, had a progressive program for bringing in minorities and women to do business with the state of Louisiana before David Dinkins became the mayor of the city of New York and established that kind of program here in New York City. And you have to ask yourself, why? You want to know why? The reason is very simple. That we did not exercise our political power to translate it into some type of economic development initiative that made sense for us. And so we could have a mayor walking around here talking about how am I doing and saying we don't want to have any kind of, quote, quota program with respect to bringing people of color and women into the business activity of the city of New York. But I don't recall all these people who talk about they don't like quotas having a problem when the effective quota was 0 for our people for all these many years. They didn't have a problem with the quota then, but when we start talking about having some affirmative efforts, some progressive efforts, some productive efforts to fundamentally change the way the city of New York does business, I'm telling you because I hear it all the time, people now are talking about we're taking something from them. All right? And what we're taking from them, and you're damn right we're taking from them, is the expectation that life is going to be the way it was. What we're taking from them is the advantage that they've had for so many years, the advantage that came from other people being excluded from the process. That advantage is gone. That advantage is not going to be a part of the way that the city of New York does business, and we are about making that change happen. And I'll also tell you that there's a lot of people who work for the city of New York, because we're going to speak frankly here today in this summit, I know. There's a lot of people who work for the city of New York, and they're waiting David Dinkins out. All right, they're waiting him out as sure as I'm standing here because they say, yes, he signed the executive order, the historic executive order establishing this initiative, this progressive initiative for getting women and people of color to be able to do business with the city of New York, a $650 million goal for this fiscal year, the largest municipally based program of its type any place in the United States, and they're waiting him out. All right, they're waiting him out because they know anybody that you've heard of who has been mentioned as a, quote, serious candidate for mayor has already said they're against this type of program. And they know that the day that somebody else is mayor, other than this mayor, that program is gone. That program, so they're going to wait him out. And they're going to drag their feet, and they're going to try to keep their head low, because if we find out what they're doing, of course, that's a very different story. But they're going to try and do as little as possible to advance this program, waiting out this mayor, and we are going to look to move forward in a very real fashion. So in closing, let me just say this. There's a past, there's a present, there's a future. Our past, of course, is replete with stories of how we have overcome challenges and how we're going to move forward. Our present, we obviously have to look at our circumstances and our situation and see what our resources are, what our capabilities are, and how we'll move forward. And of course, our future, I believe, can be a very bright one, a very positive one, if we but move together, in a powerful way, in a way that says we recognize what brings us together in the very first place, and we recognize that our future is one that we can share together. So I look forward to a very successful summit, and thank you very much.
We'd like to recognize the Honorable Deloise Blakely, who is the Deputy Mayor of Harlem and also President of New Future Foundation. We'd like to recognize the Honorable Archie Sprigner, who is a member of the New York City Council. and Mr. Alfonso Green, Director of Commercial Development for the Borough of Queens, and he's here representing the Borough President's Office. And now, we'd like to have Congressman Major Owens, who has joined us, bring your remarks. Congressman Owens, I neglected to mention to you earlier that Congressman Owens and Congressman Towns are co-chairs of the summit. And now we will have remarks by Congressman Owens, who will greet you.
Thank you. First of all, let me apologize for being late. I was invited to lead a Little League parade and throw out the first ball, and I thought that I have 50 to 100 kids. I could get it over with quickly. This was in Park Slope, a new part of my district. I found 15 blocks of kids, forever and ever marching on. I finally had to leave before the game began. At any rate, I'm here and I want to welcome you as co-chairman of this second African American Summit here in the city of New York. I am here late, but I intend to stay all day, and I intend to be very much of proceedings which I think are very important. These summits are convened on the principle that there is an agenda above and beyond partisan considerations, above and beyond group considerations, an agenda that ought to apply to all African Americans, an agenda that we can all agree upon. And the two primary concerns of this particular summit, education and economic development, are certainly items that we can all agree upon in general. More specifically, I hope we can get down to understanding that we ought to leave this conference with some concrete actions in mind. We ought to leave this conference with a new level of awareness as to what ought to be done. Now, we are in the city of New York, and we are more than 2 million strong. It ought to mean a great deal. We ought to be the model of economic development for African Americans throughout the nation. You have to start with jobs, because jobs are a part of the economic process. Without jobs, you don't get income to create savings, which end up being capital to start businesses. You have to start with jobs. And we need to deal with job policies in this city. We need to deal with the fact that some of the best jobs in this city are still off limits for African Americans. The city residency law that used to exist many years ago, before we became such a large part of the population, there was a residency law which said the best jobs have to be reserved for New Yorkers. You don't give away the teachers' jobs, you don't give away the firemen's jobs, you don't give away the policeman's jobs, you don't give away the sanitation jobs to people who live in the surrounding suburbs and in New Jersey. Sanitation, civil service tests, 100,000 people applied, coming from all over the metropolitan area. Sanitation worker. Police, we're going toward a new exam, and they're recruiting in churches, and a lot of activity about getting more minorities. You will get no greater percentage of minorities this time than you got last time, because we are still in a recession. No matter what the Republicans in Congress say, we're still in a recession, which means that you'll have people from the suburbs and from New Jersey who have master's degrees and PhDs who can't find jobs taking that police exam, and they'll push down our people. We cannot compete in that kind of arena. People know how to take tests. The test doesn't tell you how to be a good policeman. It just measures how well you can take tests. So those people will take the jobs. We need a residency law like the rest of the villages and the counties and the cities in New York State have. We need to reserve those jobs, not only for economic development, because they give better service if they know the city better. So jobs are part of it. Jobs, coming down hard on agencies that contract with the city, coming down hard on them and making them abide by the anti-discrimination laws. We have what we call a prevailing wage law. That's a federal law. And the Comptroller's office has people who go out and monitor every job to make sure that the prevailing wage law is being observed. We don't have anything when it comes to laws related to discrimination in this town. So, jobs are very important. Jobs and economic development go hand in hand. And then, of course, the economic development begins when you get contracts. And as Mr. Ford said, the mayor's policy on contracts has to be implemented. Let's get on with it, because there are too many people lingering around who do want to sabotage it. They should have been gotten rid of a long time ago, but they do want to sabotage it. We have to make certain that it goes forward. We have to make certain also that the consumer power in this, we have consumer power. That's a part of the equation of economic development. Consumer power means consumers can choose where they shop. Consumers can choose what services they use. You know, we ought to have greater impetus to organize our consumer power, because there are corporations based in New York City. New York City is a big market, and we're a big part of that market. There are corporations based in New York City that don't have any blacks on the board, still, at this late date. We did an analysis and had a meeting at Dr. Cave's office once, and, you know, major corporations have some still have no blacks, and then none of them have blacks from Brooklyn, by the way, since we're having this summit in Brooklyn. You know, we got major problems. Jim says 2 of them have blacks in Brooklyn. But, you know, I did an analysis of 50 beyond the list that we had at Dr. K's office, and I assure you, if there are 2 out of 50, I'd be surprised, but that would be good. Now, beyond economic development, and closely related to it, interrelated with it, jobs and economic development, is education. You know, in this complex society of ours, you don't survive in business unless you have education. You know, they say that the first requirement for being in business is the predator's instinct. You have to go for the jugular and know how to really move in there and get what you want. That's the first requirement in this capitalist economy. It may be true, but the people who like that, who can succeed nowadays, are zero unless they know how to buy and select the expertise and the information that they need along with that. Nobody survives in this business climate unless they are aware of the fact that you need tremendous amount of expertise and education and information. So our folks have to understand that, and education in this city is a disgrace. The public school education is a disgrace and getting worse all the time. We've had the Board of Education hijacked by a group of people who have a political agenda that has nothing to do with children. They don't care. We have to take back the Board of Education. We have to insist and do some unusual things. I don't know what they are, beyond the search for a new chancellor, because we got 4 people who have the votes, and they're going to put any bum they want to in there. They don't care whether he knows anything about education, has a vision or any concerns that relate to our concerns. They don't care. Some kind of confrontation, some kind of obstacle has to be placed in the way of this group that's snowballing forward with a process that may deliver the final coup de grace in terms of establishing once and for all for the next few years that nothing is going to happen positively in the education system. Our children are in prisons. Our children are in prisons. High schools that have no extracurricular activities, no bands, no drama groups, nothing except you go to school and you sit down in class and be yelled at by people. There's a prison atmosphere. Added to that is the fact that you have to go past metal detectors that really don't stop violence in schools. You stop violence in schools when you give kids alternatives to let off that energy in positive ways. But all of this goes on and on and on, while less and less education gets accomplished. And in Washington, all they want to do is establish new tests, new standards and new tests. And the great fight in Washington right now is to say, no, you can establish your standards and your tests, but we're not going to vote for that unless you have also opportunities to learn delivery systems. The federal government has to put money into making the delivery systems work and be critical of the way the state set up the education system and the way the schools are operated. So this is a very important summit. Everything is very much closely interrelated. I want to congratulate Dr. Cave, Reverend Flake, and the people who conceived of this idea in the first place, and also congratulate all my colleagues who assembled here on helping to move the idea forward. We need unity. There are so many issues that we could march together on, and we must march together on in order to survive. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Congressman Owens. We would now like to bring to you the Honorable Lenora Fulani, who will bring you very brief greetings.
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the dais guests and the organizers of the summit. I'm very honored to be here. I actually flew in from LA 2 days ago, where I was in the streets of South Central and Watts in response to requests from community leaders out there who asked me to come in and do some work with them, as well as I went out to work on a campaign for an African American who's running for mayor. I just wanted to briefly share a thought that I had, because I also have another meeting that's happening at this very moment. A guest of mine from Washington, D.C. is speaking at Reverend Sharpton's meeting, and I have to run off to that. One of the issues of being in LA was watching all of the energy that went into cooling out the African American community. leaders, liberals and conservatives, were telling black folks to cool out. And I guess I'm not in a position to cool out the militancy and radicalness of our people. In fact, I'm much more prepared to figure out how to use that militancy and radicalness so that it works in our behalf. People have the right to be outraged at the level of injustice in this country. One of the reasons why there's such an effort to cool us out is because of the failed educational system and the failed economic system. And there's a way in which people talk about politics and economics as if they don't go hand in hand. You can't have political power in this country unless you have economic power, and vice versa. And that's a real issue in our communities and something that we have to deal with straight up. One of the things that happened in LA after the aftermath of the riots is the mayor of that city and the corporations came together in an effort to so-called rebuild LA. And what happened was that the corporations got all kinds of tax breaks because the people in political power weren't looking after black folk. And the 75,000 to 90,000 jobs that were supposed to come into the city have not come in. Less than 5,000 jobs have been provided there. And so who benefited from the aftermath of the riots are corporate America, not the black and Latino community. Here in New York City, we cannot talk about economic failure or educational failure without tying those two things together. In fact, from the vantage point of the people who run New York City, of the corporations who have control over the economy of the city, the educational system is working quite well. Because the educational system is equipping people to work in a place where there are no jobs. In fact, the success of that system is the fact that our young people are forced to stand on the streets without a future and without a vision. And if we're going to have a serious dialogue here today, that's one of the things that has to be dealt with. We can't just talk about educational reform. We have to talk about the failure of this economic system. Many people are now speaking about Clinton's plan to retrain all of the people who are now losing their jobs, not just people on welfare, not just the unemployed, but also the working poor. But if, in fact, people are retrained, where are the jobs they're going to go get unless ordinary people in our communities and ordinary people in our country have the kind of political clout to turn this thing inside out? So we've had millions of conferences and summits and meetings where we speak about the economy, where we speak about politics, and where we speak about education. What we have to do is come out of here today and out of all the work that we do in this city over the next year with a serious plan to grab enough political power for our people so that we can educate our kids, so that we can build something together, so that we don't have to come together next year and do this dialogue over and over and over again. If we don't deal with the failure of the economic system, we can't build an educational system for young people. We don't need to be cooled out. We need to stand up and fight for political and economic power so that our kids can get educated. Thank you very much.
The Nation of Islam talked about education and economic development. The NAACP talked about education and economic development. In the 60s and 70s, today we talk about the miracle of Atlanta, a $400 million airport. Black Americans got 30% of that public work project, and Atlanta change. Here in New York, and Wallace can testify to this, that on the drawing boards right now, there are plans for $51 billion worth of construction in the city of New York over the next 10 years. Just think about it. If African Americans got 5%, 10%, 20%, 30% of that $51 billion, what a difference this community might look like. But getting from there to here will take work. The challenge as we move into the 21st century is to harness the energy and the capability that exists in our community. We are closing the gap in political development. We are closing the gap in the question of the gap between education between white America and African America. But brothers and sisters, it's sad to report today that the gap in the economic area, not only is it not closing, but it is actually widened as we sit here today. One of the organizations that has been playing a significant role in trying to help us close that gap is the New York Black United Fund. It is ironic as we meet here today that you ought to know that the first Black United Fund was organized in Los Angeles after the Watts Rebellion, not of last year, but in 1965. It was called the Brotherhood Crusade. The Black United Fund in New York, Los Angeles, and around the country has stayed on the case of trying to harness our collective economic effort. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the President and Executive Director of the New York Black United Fund, who has already made his contribution to this summit, but financing the bulk of this summit, Mr. Kermit Eady.
Good morning. Can I have that again? You heard what Wallace said. He said, if you don't do it louder, I'm going to be here a long time. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, brothers and sisters. It is indeed an honor for me to be with you this morning and to speak about economic development. It is something that I have been involved with for quite some time, and it grew out of my history of growing up on a farm in the South, plowing a mule. And some of you may know something about that. Many of you may not like to know something about that. But it's a saying that my dad used to say when he would wake us up. There were 5 boys in the family, and even the girls, and 4 girls. And when he'd be waking us up at 5:30 in the morning before we would go to school to go plow the mule, and we'd be grumbling, you know, under our breath. And sometimes he'd hear that grumbling, and he had one favorite statement that he made all the time. If you take care of the land will take care of you. I didn't understand that then and didn't care about it. I sure understand it now. But let me, before I start in my presentation with you this morning, give thanks to Stephen Davis and to Dr. Jackson, to Congressman Owens and to Congressman Flake and Dr. Cave and all others who really worked diligently in putting this effort together. And Stephen has been really working very, very hard because he is what we call the hired gun. He's the one that does all the work and the rest of us give input. And you see, I know what that's about because I run an organization where I do all the work and everybody else give input. Somebody's got to do the work. Another thing I would like to do while I'm in the presence of Major Owens, and have not had the opportunity to do this publicly, and I did it, I was with him once, I think last year, at the same time, and he had to leave before I presented. In 1989, the Black United Fund became the first organization in this country to manage what is called the Combined Federal Campaign, the Federal Charity Drive. That is where federal employees give their charitable dollars or their philanthropic dollars through a campaign called CFC, Combined Federal Campaign. And we got the contract to manage that campaign in 1989. The United Way had had it since its inception in 1962. And not only were we the first to get the contract, most definitely that also meant we were the first blacks to have received the contract. And you would be interested to know at that time it was the largest contract awarded to any black institution, agency, or business in this country, a $2 million contract. But what I want to let Major Owens know that he may not know is that the very first year that we received the contract, we raised more dollars than United Way had ever raised with a less administrative cost in the 32-year history that they had it, in any one of those 32-year histories. We beat the first year by we beat their best year by $3,000. And folks tried to play that down, Major, and said, well, that doesn't mean much. Well, to us, if it was 3 cents, as long as we beat them, and they had it for 32 years prior to us getting it. The second year, we beat the best year by $150,000, and they tried to play that down. The third year, we beat the best year by $210,000. And the fourth year, they bought my staff. But what I want, and that happens to be true. So the Federal Executive Board then said, well, Kermit, you don't have the staff anymore. United Way bought the staff. So I wanted you to know that's the kind of arena we're in, but that makes us proud because we know that we must be doing something right. And of course, we don't let that bother us. God fixes where we go on to greater and bigger things, because our Lord always makes that possible for us. But I'm particularly speaking to Major Owens, the Congressman Owens, because Congressman Owens was gracious enough to be one of our campaign chairpersons the second year that we had that campaign. And I am just grateful, and I wanted him to know that on the very personal level, we didn't let him down. We don't have the contract anymore, but we're very proud of what happened. We had the experience, and we don't have it because they bought the people who were working for us, you know, to do it. But we wanted you to know, Congressman, that we did not let you down. Everything was wonderful, and we beat the system. So we thank you very much for your help and support on that one. As we go on and we begin to talk about economic development, because that's what it's all about, and again, that's why I'm glad to be with you, because this is something I've been talking about now for a long time. It really boils down to land, institutions, and ownership. It boils down to that. If you don't have land, you don't have power. If you think I'm joking, all you've got to do is understand what wars are fought over. Even if you read the Old Testament, there's a whole lot in the Old Testament talking about land. If you take a look at what's going on in South Africa, or what's going on in so-called Middle East, the whole issue is about land and what God put into the earth. There's a scripture in Psalms that says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Well, it's long overdue that we as a people begin to understand that God put the riches in the earth. We don't know of any riches in the sky other than where we're going after we leave here. But since we're here, everything that we wear, everything that we own, everything that is in this room comes from God's earth. Every single thing. If any one of you in this room has got something that didn't come from the earth right now, I want to know about it. So if we understand that, then we should understand very clearly the importance of land and ownership. Yesterday I was sitting down in a meeting, or day before yesterday, with a friend and colleague of mine that we're working together with now and doing some business in the area of mortgage brokerage and that kind of thing. And we were going over some numbers. In the 5 boroughs of New York, in the 4 boroughs of New York, excluding Manhattan, and we excluded Manhattan for a purpose, Nassau and Suffolk County, the foreclosure rate on private homes is $25,000 per year, and 30% of those are black owned. Less than 10% redemption. Did you hear those numbers? 25,000 a year being foreclosed, 30% owned by blacks, and less than 10% redemption rate. What is that saying to us? First of all, we don't have financial institutions anymore in our community. If you don't have financial institutions in the community, there's no place for you to get any money. If any of you saw Channel 13 about a year ago when they did the whole piece on what happened in Chicago with some folks, and all of the financial institutions moved out of the community, and when they tried to get a loan to refurbish their home with good credit, good everything, they were turned down because it was said, we don't like the location of the property. Well, if there's no investment coming into the community, the location of the property becomes superfluous because it's automatically going to go down and stay down. So we're being denied in every turn. If we don't have financial institutions, which in my opinion, we must have in our communities, we must have a place to get capital. I don't need to tell any of you in this room what happens when you go to a bank. When you take some of your major banks, even Citibank, you're going to be very fortunate if you can get a loan over $50,000, being black. It's not there. But let me also explain to you some of what is happening with the Citibanks and the Greenpoint banks. They're stockpiling. Many of those two banks in particular hold a lot of your mortgages. So they're stockpiling that property because they're not in a position to do anything about it. That's not what they're trained to do. So they're now taking homes and they're just there. It's costing them money to maintain them and to upkeep them. That $25,000 a year. They're now finding themselves in a lot of trouble. So now you're beginning to take a look at one of the reasons why the banking industry is going down. They're holding on to property and nothing that can be done with it because they're foreclosed on property. We are not, as a people, taking advantage of bailing that property out and making it productive. Something Brother Ford said earlier, and when I listened to him talk and others who spoke, I said to myself, I don't know what I'm going to say, but I always trust in the good Lord to provide me with what needs to be said. When he said that we've got to be prepared, I want to reemphasize that. It is not enough for us to march and demonstrate and open doors. Because if we take a look at us historically, we have marched, we have opened doors, and we must continue to do that. But other people have reaped the benefits of our marching and our opening doors because we haven't had structure in place. We were not prepared to receive what we fought for. So when Wallace Ford and Mayor Dinkins put in new programs for contracts to come to black and minority people, if we don't have the structure in place, they're going to have a rough time awarding us contracts. And we're still going to be saying the mayor didn't do anything. It is incumbent upon us, all of us in this room, to put those structures in place. We have got to understand very clearly what building an infrastructure is all about. We've got to understand very, very clearly what a community support and delivery system is all about. When we take a look in this country at the Fortune 500, the 8% that owns 80% of the wealth in this country, they're the same people. They sit on each other's boards of directors. They're not a whole lot of separate people. And they coalesce to control the masses because that's where they get their money. When we take a look at the U.S. Senate in particular in this country, they come from corporate America. So the policies that are being made are policies that's going to reflect those corporations and policies that are going to provide jobs and ownership for them when they leave government office and are in positions to do even more for themselves and go back to those corporations. So what is behind our politics is our economics. If we want Congressman Owens to do something in the black community that is so-called revolutionary, we'd better make sure that Congressman Owens is getting all of his money from us. My daddy also used to say, he who pays you sways you. We once asked a major magazine, one of the major magazines, black magazines in this country, to do a story, a major piece on the Black United Fund. This magazine has never until this day done a piece on Black United Fund. And we asked the owner of this publication to do this story. And the owner said, I sure like what you're doing, but I'm not going to write a story about you. And I said, what? We're not going to write a story about you. Those corporations where you're trying to gain access for people to give to the Black United Fund is where I get my money for my ads. I just want us to face certain realities as we build, so that all of us need to understand the positions that we're in. If we find ourselves allow ourselves to get in catch-22 positions, then we can sit here and have summits until Jesus returns and not one single thing is going to happen. Not one benefit is going to take place. Because I can't do anything for you if my total allegiance is outside the community. We understand coalitions. We understand networking and interlocking. But as a friend of mine says very clearly, it is no longer enough for us to talk about we're going to stick together just because we're the color of our skin. We know that's just not true, brothers and sisters. That's why this room is not packed. So the other thing we got to do is we got to do business. We've got to do business with each other, because that then presents us with another reason why we've got to stay together. Because I get angry with you or you get angry with me, and we wind up not speaking anymore over something foolish, because there's nothing pulling us back together. If we're in bed doing business together, something's going to pull us back together. The dollar is. The economics is. So we've got to be about doing business together. It's no longer enough just to say that, well, just because we are black, while it may be enough to keep the fibers of other ethnic groups in this country together, for some reason, and we all have ideas about those reasons, it's not keeping us together. So let's get on about the business of doing some business. Let's deal with some land and some ownership. 2 years ago, all of you in this room by now probably know of a place in South Carolina called Hilton Head. 20 years ago or 25 years ago, many of you probably have never heard of it. I grew up in that part of the country. Hilton Head was all black. You didn't find white folks on Hilton Head at all. Now some of the riches of the world is on Hilton Head. And the outer islands, Ladies Island, St. Phelps Island, St. Helena's Island, even Paris Island, all that's part of Beaufort County. Well, what's happening in that part of the country? There's more development going on in that part of the country right now than any other part of this USA. So we got a call from Penn Center, the brother that Campbell that runs Penn Center, and asked us, could we help? The problem is just very, very great. Blacks are losing land at alarming rates. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about 49 acres of land, $25. I'm talking about 446 acres of land, $700. I can go on ad infinitum, and land that's also on the seacoast. We're losing it. Every month, the first week in October, the carpetbaggers are there with suitcases full of money. And if you haven't paid your taxes for any 6-month period during that year, your land goes on the auction block. And your land is auctioned off. You then have a year and a day, as we know, called in rem, to redeem that property. If you don't redeem the property, the land then goes to the bidder at 9%, because you still must pay the bidder 9%, because the state allows the bidder that for making the land productive again. Well, when we got the call and they asked us, could we help, our first reaction was, well, what do you want us to do? And the first thing we were asked, well, we would like for you to give us a grant. We said, well, we can't do that. We've got to put structures, economic structures in place. When we do housing development at Black United Fund and using the city's programs, and it's called affordable housing, The public looks at it as being affordable more than we do. It is affordable. We look at it as an economic venture that we launch with. We interlock and we network with other black organizations. We're now interlocking and networking with black businesses and doing business together. That broadens the entire power base. Instead of building this way, let's take a look at building this way with each other. The base will automatically go up. We can't look just to be building it by ourselves. Because even if you're successful at doing it, you're going to have problems. Recently, some of you saw in the New York Newsday and other places that the ADL is attacking black people and black organizations. Well, we're one of the organizations that's on the list. We feel good about that. We must be doing something right. But we're not going to roll over and die either. The reason we are being attacked, whether it's the ADL or any other group of people, is because we don't have economic power. When we send our congresspersons to Congress and our city council persons to the city council, if we don't put the power behind them, or when we send Dr. Sandford to the Board of Regents and there's no power behind her, she's in a position to do very little. She once said to me, and I thought about it later, that she has to negotiate very much to get one little thing through the Board of Regents, being the only black. And I think she said she needed 9 votes to get something through the Board of Regents. And you know what? It dawned on me as I thought about that later. While we are so pleased that she's there, we sure can't put a lot of pressure on her to tell her to bring home the bacon when we don't have any power behind her. So we need to understand that. There's very little that she can do because we don't have the economic power. The ADL, with a not-for-profit organization, $32 million. 32 million budget. We've been in existence 14 years and we haven't raised $32 million. Why? The money that it takes us a year to raise, they raise in 1 hour. Do we understand money? And let me just say something else. Do we understand what the not-for-profit sector is all about? All of us take a look at corporations and businesses. Do we understand that sector? A $124 billion operation in this country. And I'm not talking about public welfare. I'm talking about United Jewish Appeals, Catholic Charities, Protestant welfare agencies, the agencies that get the contracts from the city, the federal government and the state. When you get laid off from your jobs and they step in and say, we can do that job for $10 million, and by you being laid off, they're saving the city $100 million. Well, you and I both know they can't do the job. You've been trained for 10 and 15 years. And the contracts for many times are not even put up for bid. We have no power. Those agencies, $124 billion. Why do you think we are under attack? The Green Bay Packers is a not-for-profit corporation. Blue Cross Blue Shield, which the government's going to bail out, a not-for-profit corporation. We are the ones that got the stigma against what not-for-profit is. And they want us to continue to have it. We also believe that if you work for a not-for-profit corporation, that you're not supposed to make any money. Well, Bill Aramone from United Way told you that wasn't true. And they're still making a lot of money. Chronicle of Philanthropy just came out last week, listed not-for-profit corporation salaries around this country. The president of Mount Sinai, $779,000 a year. You just need to understand what you're doing and what you're dealing with when you're dealing with money and dealing with economics. It is about economics. It always has been. When we stopped farming land in the South, it was interesting what the federal government said to us. They said, we don't need you to grow food anymore. There's more than enough of that. So the small farmers, we will land bank you, meaning they will pay you a certain amount not to farm. And all the black farmers went out of business. So now I go back to my hometown, which was segregated when I left, and I find no small black businesses. I don't find people even having gardens in many places. They all go downtown and spend the money with somebody that don't look like us. And I'm not being derogatory. If we understand very clearly as we take a look at what the Asian community does, they built an economy within an economy. There's nothing magical about that. They do business. And those things that we fought and demonstrated for over the years, other ethnic groups come in and take advantage of it because we have no structure in place. That's why they're getting more from even government than we're getting. They just got here yesterday. We went and fought the wars. We did all of the work, and they reaped the benefits. And we're going to have to start taking some responsibility for it. It is not enough. We all understand what happened from 1619 on up to present, and even prior. Well, let's move our thinking higher than 1619. Because talking about 1619 is only going to keep you at 1619 if that's all you got to talk about. If you can't focus any higher than that, then you're going to stay enslaved because your mentality is enslaved. And if your mentality is enslaved, all of you is enslaved. We've got to be about the business of building. We've got to put financial institutions in our community. We've got to own the land. We cannot afford to lose homes the rate that we are losing them. It is not making any sense. We've got to build, we've got to develop, we've got to grow. It is about land and ownership. It's about institutions and institution building. Brothers and sisters, we've got to take a look at ourselves. As we do our workshops today, we got to really begin to think, what are we sitting in these workshops for? Why are we here? Why is it the federal government didn't want us to maintain a contract, $2 million contract? When I found out that was the largest contract let to any black organization or institutions, I almost cried. By the federal government. And because we are successful with it, they said, we got to get that back. And so you'll know when I said manage the campaign in New York, there are 560 such federal locations around the country and around the world. And around the world, we're basically talking about military bases. And when we take a look at the not-for-profit sector in particular, they're talking about social services. Social services is going to keep you social. When I talk to people at United Way and we talk about economic development, they have no problem telling you, we're not interested in that. We are interested in providing social services. Well, social services is self-perpetuating. We understand social services, don't misunderstand me. But that's not going to build you any institutions or provide any jobs that Major Owens is talking about. That's begging. If we put our economic institutions in place, our social services will automatically follow. The morality of our families will automatically increase. I said to the Chancellor here in New York once when we were in conversation with the United Way, and I said to him, I said, you could institute all the programs you want in the school system and you're not going to have one bit of change until there's some economic changes which affect the lives of families in New York City. You're dreaming. No change is going to take place if a kid is sleeping with rats and roaches and the family is destabilized because the mother and the father can't find employment. We better understand human and financial resources, and I say this as I close. One of the things we talk about heavily in the Black United Fund is organizing the human and financial resources of black people to help themselves. What am I talking about? Human and financial resources. Let me give you a little example that may make you think. Many of you in this room at this present time probably have children that are in college or starting out in college. Many of you will pretty soon have the same. We all know that education is important. I'm beginning to think, though, on that note, that it's becoming a cultural lag, meaning we need to, uplift that a bit too. We need to move away some from business administration and teach business development, because we don't have any organizations and institutions to administer. They belong to somebody else, and corporate America is not going to let you administer too many of theirs. So let's talk about how we're going to develop some businesses. But when we talk about that human and financial resource, your child goes to college, and let's assume, especially if they're out of state, we're not talking about New York City. Let's assume you could get away, and some people tell me I'm a little bit too conservative, with $40,000 for 4 years. Is that a good number? No. Higher? Higher. Okay. Well, I'm going to keep it at 40 just for the sake of this discussion. I figured it would be higher. First of all, most of us in this room don't have $40,000 to send our kids to college. Okay? Let's assume one or two of us have the 40, the rest of us don't. So what do? We've got to go out and borrow the money. Grants, all kinds of things, loans, everything. Or the family that has the 40, all the family resources is gone to that kid now that's going to college. The family's life savings, or another 40 years of debt, whichever one you choose. But all of that is now gone. That has left the community. It's left the family. If the child goes to a white institution, it's going back to the white community. When the child graduates from college, the child must have a place to be employed. So the child comes back, and since you and me hadn't provided any place for them to work, the child's got to go downtown. If the child is now in the top 95 percentile in some of the high-tech sciences, because the IBM don't want them anymore, AT&T don't want them anymore, unless they're some kind of scientist. But in that top 5%, they're going downtown to work. Well, guess what? The human resource just left the community too. So there's nothing in the community. All of the resources, there's only two kinds, human and financial. All of that left our community. The human resource went to the school. The financial resource went downtown. Well, what do we have left? Or to the government or wherever. What do we have? That's our fault. Again, we've got to take our thinking higher than where it is. While we must understand our history and who we are, we must understand that and use that in a context to take ourselves to another level. Economics is the only way that we're going to get out of this quagmire of filth and degradation that we're in, and stop people from printing our names in papers and spying on us and beating us up with police brutality. It's not going to happen any other way. And I say that without reservation. We've got to build, we've got to construct, we've got to own, we've got to interlock, we've got to network. I thank you very much for this time being with you.
We thank you very much, Mr. Eady. Before we continue with the summit, we have a couple more recognitions that we'd like to make. We'd like to recognize Assemblyman Albert Van, who has joined us. Assemblyman, welcome. The Economic Development Plan for the summit, Dr. Gloria Benford.
Good morning. Morning. I feel at a distinct disadvantage because I'm probably the only non-public speaker coming to the microphone today. I hope you'll bear with me because I'm very nervous. First, I'd like to thank the distinguished guests and co-sponsors of the conference. I'd also like to thank the participants. This morning when I got up and realized it was rainy and windy outside, I was wondering how many people would show up, but I realized that those that did show up would be dedicated, and that's what we're looking for. I also recognize that those who showed up would realize that we are about the business of carrying on the struggle of our ancestors, and that we have an obligation to do so. I'm here to present the strategy that the Economic Development Committee has developed over the past 6 months. I don't know if all of you know, but in October of last year, the first summit was held at Congressman Flake's school in Queens. And at that time, the Economic Development Workshop had a mandate to form a committee under the auspices of the African American Leadership Summit. And to that end, we've been meeting monthly since November to try to research and put together a strategy to present to you today. I have to confess this is truly a collaborative effort. I had hoped that I could be able to ask the members of the Economic Development Committee to stand, but I don't think they're all present in the room. So maybe at the end of this, if we can get them all together, they'll be kind enough to come and take a bow themselves. Finally, I'd like to say that the strategy that we have outlined has taken into consideration the resources and the assets and the liabilities of our community, and we've tried to put together a strategy that takes those things into consideration, as well as develops a strategy that will allow each and every person in the community to take part in the strategy. First, I'd like to report on our findings in terms of our research. Actually, I should start off by saying that the Economic Development Committee broke down into 3 task forces. We have what we call the Marketing Task Force for Black Businesses and Enterprise, we have a Community Development Task Force, and we have a Capital Formation Task Force. Each one of those task forces went off and did their own research, came back and developed a strategy around the research that they had found, and then we incorporated it into a total strategy. Unfortunately, the Marketing and Research, the Marketing Task Force for Black Businesses and Enterprises research divulged that, as has been mentioned on the stage several times, we do not do business with one another. We find that in every community except the African American community, there's a penchant for doing business with each other. For some reason, we feel that we need to go out of our neighborhoods to do business with ourselves. To the extent that that holds us back economically, I'd like to give you an example. If you were to take $1,000 and put it into a Cuban or Latino community, at the end of, say, 6 months, that $1,000 would give you back $1,610. If you were to take that same $1,000, put it into the black community, at the end of 6 months, you would get back $1,140. Latinos, Asians, all of them turn over their money anywhere from 4.5 times to 28 times more than we circulate money in our own community. I used to do per diem teaching, and I used to always tell my students, pay attention to the color of the hands that you put your dollar into, because odds are that person is going to make a job for a person who has the same color hands as he does. And if they're not the same color hands as yours, you can believe the job is not going to be yours either. So to that end, the Marketing Task Force came up with a 3-pronged strategy. They want to develop 2 education programs, one geared toward the community. That program would focus on informing black people, A, they need to do business with one another, B, that they need to go out of their way to try to do business with one another. We understand all of the problems and the obstacles that face us in trying to do business with one another in terms of limited service, limited goods. But even if it's only toothpaste or a loaf of bread or a pound of potatoes, make it a habit to buy at least one some item each week from somebody black. Everybody in the community can buy one item per week from somebody black. So the education part of the Marketing Task Force strategy is to begin to disseminate the word in the community that we need to buy at least one item per week. The second strategy that the Marketing Task Force came up with to help make it easy for us to do business with one another is by June, they intend to complete what they call a Black Business Directory. This is a prototype of the directory. They're going to do a block by block canvas of each borough to find out where the churches are, where the elected officials are, what the businesses are, what the social services are. And each borough will then have its own section. To that end, the marketing task force needs your help. If you only agree to take your own block and do a survey of your block and come back and report to us, there are no businesses on our block, there's one business on our block, there's one hospital on our block, there's one school on our block. That would help us out. Again, each person take your own block and let us know what enterprise. Is there a black dentist on your block? Is there a black doctor on your block? Whatever's on your block that we need to know about, please let us know.
In a very serious deliberation on the floor of the Assembly, the members rallied together behind this person because she symbolizes for us a real change in the educational system. And so at this point in time, in the tradition of Ella Baker, of September Poinsett Clark, and all of the other outstanding leaders that we've had in our tradition, I would like to bring forth our leader in the educational movement in the state of New York, the Honorable Adelaide Sandford. Thank you.
Hotep, as I look out into this audience this morning, I'm looking for our Fannie Lou Hamers, for our Septimus Clarks, for our Rosa Parks, for our Marcus Garveys. I'm looking for our Malcolms. I'm looking for the unborn and the potential geniuses and leaders. You will see them when you look into your mirror. For there is no they to do it. It is only we. We are the them and the they. Culturally, we have been sitting too long this morning. So I beg your forbearance, because we are in a strange land and we've wandered so long in this wilderness that we have begun to imitate and to uphold the behaviors of the oppressor. The question, and the only question for me as a person involved in working with the fragile, gentle, tender, very, very, very flexible mind of our young people is this question that comes from the poem by Margaret Burroughs. And it is the question that every young person in this auditorium is asking. And that question is, what shall I tell my children who are black? What shall I tell them, born into a world where everything lovely, pure, perfect, fine, classic is white? Lovely white ruffles Sunday dresses, long sleek white Cadillacs, fluffy white clouds, and angels' wings are white. But what shall I tell my children, fruit of my womb, born into a world where black is evil, witch's brew is black. A black hen lays no eggs and a black cow gives no milk. When the stock market breaks, it's Black Monday. What shall I tell my children without a language that gives them verbalization privately? Without the images and the icons to identify them with what is powerful and strong? Without an understanding of the movements of resistance? Without an understanding of the strategy that our ancestors were able to put in place to bring them to a measure of sanity when all around them there was an attempt to breed insanity and self-destruction? What shall I tell my children who are black? And when I see them on the subways and on the buses and on the street corners and in the hellholes that we call school, that is the question. Because what we have told them is not true. What we have permitted them to be exposed to is distorted. We're talking today about education and economic development. There are two systems of education, formal and informal. The formal organization that we call the school is an industry. It is not separate from economics. It is a $7 billion industry in New York State alone. In New York City, $7 billion, not counting 40 times that much for the state. So while we talk about developing an educational program that will bring our children and our people to liberation and freedom, please understand that that is not the agenda of the industry. The industry of education is propelled and grows on failure. The more children fail, the more money is generated in the industry of education. The more children fail, the more children go into the mental hygiene, the criminal justice system, and the welfare system. 3 other industries. And these industries, each one is controlled by the same oppressor who brought us to these shores to develop the economics of the United States of America. We were not brought here for freedom or beauty. We were brought here for economic development. The myth that our children have been told is that all of the people who came to America came under the same conditions, but that some got up early, stayed up late, worked harder, sacrificed, pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and therefore have gained an economic advantage. That is not true. That is a myth, like Snow White, Little Tom Thumb, Hansel and Gretel, Little Bo Peep. And it should be relegated to the category of fantasy and myths and legends that have propelled the psychological damage of our people. For you see, this land was taken away from the indigenous Americans. Nobody bought this land. And up to 10 years ago, males of European background were given large tracts of land on Long Island. When you travel across the South and you look at the magnificent plantations and homes there, those people did not buy that land. It was given to them by the European government, by the governments of the states. And enslaved people built that land into magnificent plantations. They built the homes. They built the furniture with their own hands. Some of that furniture still has the engraving of the genius of people of African ancestry. So one of the problems around the issue of education is that the whole psychological aura of what has made the United States of America what it is based on a fantasy. We must begin to help our children to understand no one got up earlier or stayed up later than our people did. We must also help them to understand very clearly that there has been an exchange in the image of the historical oppressor. He one time was visible as the plantation owner and the slave master. That oppressor comes in a different form today, but it is the same oppressor. When we begin to talk about substance abuse and prevention programs, the textbook should be Chancellor Williams' The Destruction of the Black Civilization. For in that book, it tells our young people that drugs were brought into the community of people of color to form the disintegration of the social revolution. It was put there to keep us from sitting down at lunch counters, to keep us from getting into colleges and universities, to prevent us from having the kind of acuity of mind and body to develop a strategic plan for our freedom. And if we just told them that, it would help. What they have heard was, this is the black thing to do. This is the in thing. And we didn't tell them that that was a change in the message of the oppressor. When they begin to become involved in having children before they can be mothers and before they can be fathers, because Superfly, Shaft, No Place to Be Somebody, and all that entertainment that evolved to suppress the notion that not only is black beautiful, but it's smart and powerful and creative and energetic, not just beautiful. But the media came in place to give an image of what constituted blackness. And our children bought that image because there was a vacuum there. That is the informal educational system. But if we remind our young girls that teenage pregnancy for women of African ancestry is patterned after the lack of an understanding of the fact that in the institution of chattel slavery, teenage girls of African ancestry were forced to have children. They had to breed by the slave master to increase the slave population, and they were forced to breed with men of African ancestry without any look at the affection, the depth of the relationship, or the commitment. They were forced to do that to increase the slave population. And today, because they don't know that history, they choose to become mothers when they are not emotionally prepared to mother. The best possible prevention to teenage pregnancy is information and hope. The only thing we guarantee a teenage girl of African ancestry in the United States of America is welfare if you have a baby. We don't guarantee them a high school diploma that has any value. We don't guarantee them a decent job. We don't guarantee them an opportunity to develop a relationship with a male of African ancestry because we're busy putting them into the prison system and the mental hygiene system to have an industry for European people. There is an ineffable and irrevocable relationship between education and economics. You cannot separate them. If we would tell the young men who think that you raise your manhood ratio depending upon the number of children that you have by women for whom you have no affection, that's not black. That's an imitation of the slave master. For in this country, he is the only person who had children by women for whom they had no affection and they did not intend to be a father to those children. If we understand that the people who are teaching our children will not give them that lesson, because that lesson would indict and damn them. That is an educational message that must come out of our culture, tradition, and heritage. It cannot come from the oppressor. Because Dr. Martin Luther King, who has been marginalized and trivialized in his powerful, strong vocalization, talked about the need, before you get to the dream about the children joining hands, there are other pieces of that dream. And one of them says, I have a dream that someday the sons of former slave masters and the sons of former slaves will be able to sit down at the table of brotherhood. Now, I can identify the sons and daughters of former slaves. But he's telling me that I have the right to identify the sons of former slave masters. That's what he's telling me there. But you try that. You see what happens when our scholars and our researchers begin to follow the historical accepted pattern of identification of their oppressors? That's always been done. That's why you have reparations. That's why you have Marshall Plans. That's why you rebuild Vietnam and Japan. Because you have identified who destroyed them. And wherever the destruction originated from, that's where the rebuilding begins. But the nature of the informal educational system is that as soon as from among our people a voice rises to speak the truth about the nature of our condition, to say to our children, you did not have a level playing field. Your people didn't come with reparation money. Your people didn't come from a time in their history where they had scholars and historians who were available to maintain the records of their people. You see, today, if you look at Yugoslavia, or today, if you look at any of the countries that are struggling to assert themselves, you will understand that at the present time, when they are struggling for their freedom, they have bankers, they have scholars, they have doctors, they have lawyers. When freedom came for people of African ancestry, we didn't have a bank of scholars and bankers and lawyers and historians and teachers to help us to define who we were. We were just told, you free. With no money, no education, no land, no transportation, no political power. Nobody else faced that. Absolutely none. And when we now begin to swap the notion of racial and ethnic and cultural diversity for multiculturalism, what we're saying is there is an equality of problematic understanding for every culture, equally problematic. So we are very comfortable to say, oh yes, they're the Vietnamese children, and they're the children from Russia, and they're the children from Japan, and they're children from Yugoslavia, and they must all know their culture, as well as children of African ancestry. Not so. Because there's only one group that in these United States of America were chattel slaves. There's only one group who by law lost their language, history, art, music, God image, value system, worth, just one. And you cannot equate the same urgency about talking about the culture of people of African ancestry in America with a person who comes from Japan. They know where home is. They can go to the town or village that is home. They still have their language. They can speak in privacy of their language. They came in family groups and were able to perpetuate whatever residual customs enable them to be a people. There has been no loss of language, religion, value system, sense of beauty, literature, power, strength. Hegel, Agassiz, Toynbee didn't identify those continents as never having contributed anything to civilization. Only people of African ancestry. So I cannot accept the notion of multiculturalism saying that every culture has the same need for identification and restitution.
But those things that the church learns how to do should be transferred to family and individuals so that the level and the life quality of all of us can be raised. Churches should adopt schools within their neighborhoods. They should do joint venture programs, bring the schools to the church, and bring the community and the schools, bring the church and the community to the schools. And that way you have a cooperative involvement. That is being done in some areas through the school system. It is being done by churches developing their own educational institutions from pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, grade school, and high school. Churches are doing a fantastic job in influencing and impacting the education system. And in most of the child daycare centers or programs in churches in Brooklyn, where I can speak, when those children are 5 years old and they graduate from the child development centers and go into first grade, whether it be into private or public schools, they rank number 1 or number 2 in their classes. So the community is having some significant impact upon the future course of education by doing early childhood intervention in terms of education through the churches. It also helps our communities in that the churches who provide this service provide an avenue through which African American families, mothers and fathers, can go to work and leave their children in safe hands where they not only get babysitting services but education services. And many of these schools in the churches are currently teaching kids how to read before they're 5. By the time they graduate at 5, they know how to read, write. Many are learning a second language, Spanish as a second language, and they are computer literate. And so you're having a significant impact upon the future of education. Churches should develop their own continuing education programs for young adults and older adults and help in the transition of life. Also, we should teach what we call a theory of Christian economics. Christian economics is using Christ as the paradigm of how we are to develop economic entities in terms of our economic relationship to each other and to the world. And if we do that through the churches developing Christian economics and not market economics and not democratic capitalism, then we will have, when we develop our economic forte, a concern for all of us and the raising and the lifting of all of us rather than just the aggrandizement or the getting rich of some of us. Churches should be encouraged to do economic development. We should be developing housing for senior citizens. We should be developing housing for people of low to moderate income. The church should be in business. The church should last of all become an economic conduit through which businessmen and women from the African American community can come for both moral and economic support in order to go into business and to do business, and the church being a conduit through which you can receive all of the kinds of professional supports that you need to reach out to the larger community to access the economics that are needed for business development. There is a new day. There is a group of young pastors, men and women around this country in the African American church who are no longer confined to a knowledge of preaching, who are skilled and have studied in economics, politics, physics, chemistry, math, and we bring all of that to the table. And we're willing, ready, and able to sit down with any brother or sister from the community, and we must, if we are to survive at the level which we can of economic independence, and interdependence as a free society. The church, last of all, is the conduit for African American liberation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Watkins. And as you can see, the Religion and Spirituality Workshop went very well, and they not only came back with 1 or 2 recommendations, but quite an impressive list. We'd now like to hear from the workshop leader of the Multicultural Education Workshop, and that is the Honorable Priscilla Wooten, and she will tell you about what went on in the Multicultural Education Workshop and bring to you the recommendations for a plan of action from that workshop. Councilwoman Wooten.
Thank you very much. I always say that when you get into these sessions, if you didn't give us a time limit, we would be able to give you a whole lot more. But I just want to indicate that inasmuch as that we had little time for such a wide subject area, and we had almost 50 people that was in our workshop, we were able to come up with a whole lot. I really want to talk about briefly the existing educational programs and groups within the city already that relates or impacts on the Afro-American community. It's important to us that we don't continue to do things over and over again. Bob Law Educational Group have done an intensified area of educational issues as we had been discussing in the past few weeks with our committee, Dr. Jackson and Steve and the rest of us, we were talking in terms of a lot of things. One of the points that came out that we're so busy talking at each other and not talking with each other, but we're saying the same things. And in that workshop, it did come out that a lot of work that had already been done by a citywide educational group under Bob Law was very important to the points that we were making here today. And it was consistent. All of us were together. We might have been using different language, etc. But I have made a personal recommendation to the group that I've been working with in education and said that instead of creating other educational groups, that we will enhance by bringing all the groups together, and Bob Law has agreed that we will bring all of our education on Afro-America agenda together, and we will work as one to make sure that the strengths and some of the other things that they've worked on very long that we might be talking to you about embracing and giving that strong support that we know we're going to need in order to pull this off. It's nice to be able to stand before you as a councilwoman, but it's even nicer when you have other people who are the experts in the field of education and curriculum. And now I'm going to bring on your dynamite presenter from our workshop, Ms. Shelia Trannum. I'll get it right, but as long as she knows, this is a dynamite Afro-American woman who knows her stuff. And by the way, giving special recognition also to Augie Johnson, who is our Deputy Chancellor for Instruction, all gave fantastic input. I just want you to know it's been an experience. Sheila.
Thank you very much, City Councilwoman Wooten. And as she has already explained, the Education Committee on Multicultural Education this morning agreed that we should stop trying to be so divisive in the African American community. Everybody has his or her little piece of the pie, and that's your territory, and this is my territory, and did you get permission from me to form this group or that group, or to cross over this city council line or this congressional district line? That it is time for us in education to work together, and that was the recommendation coming out of the committee. And so as a result of that recommendation, the Education Committee will meet with Bob Laws and the City Task Force on Public Education to begin to plan an agenda as to how we can work together collectively in this city to make education what it needs to be for our children and for our future. The second recommendation that we had was to embrace the recommendation of the curriculum of inclusion. You know, sometimes I think we as a people spend so much time reinventing the wheel. We will reinvent a small wheel over here and a big wheel over there and a medium-sized wheel over here, and all the wheels are in place to do the same thing, and that's to get a job done. But we get so tied up in trying to invent our own little wheels that we forget sometimes that all we have to do is look around. The wheel has already been invented. It's all ready to go into motion, and all we need is the people power behind it in order to get the job done. So in looking at that, we are going to embrace the recommendations of the curriculum of inclusion, which was the state task force that was done through the help of Regent Sandford. Dr. Leonard Jeffries was involved in that effort, and very quickly, some of the recommendations of that commission, that the Commissioner of Education give continuing vitality to the initiative for multicultural education by creating the position of a special assistant to the Commissioner for Cultural Equity, that the Commissioner direct appropriate staff to undertake without delay the revision of all curricula and curriculum materials so as to ensure that they are compatible with the goals of equity and excellence for all cultures within our society. Number 3, that all groups involved in the development, dissemination, and evaluation of curricula and curriculum materials reflect in their own composition the multicultural diversity found in New York State schools. Number 4, that the recommendation department staff be led to a better understanding that adequate, accurate presentation of multicultural diversity within curriculum materials requires that the history, achievements, aspirations, and concerns of people of all cultures be equitably and accurately infused into and made an integral part of our curriculum. Number 5, that the State Education Department begin intensive discussions with textbook publishers to increase them to publish textbooks that are multicultural in substance. Number 6, that the Regents mandate new conditions of teacher and school administrator certification in the state of New York to include appropriate education and competence in multicultural education. We can't get the job done for our kids in this city until we invest in intensive staff development training for our staff, and we begin to look at changing the institutions that train our teachers to come out and they ultimately end up being oppressors of our children. We have to begin to change that on a state level, and this is the recommendation that will do it. Number 7, that the State Education Department find ways to encourage school districts to provide immediate, effective opportunities for current staff members to gain competence in multicultural education. Multicultural education is not just for African Americans. It is for us first. This is an initiative that has come out of our community. But we need to educate others. There are white teachers that are in this system, and the likelihood is that there are going to be white teachers in this system in the year 2000. We need to begin to educate them. There are African Americans in this system that look like us but have the mentality of the oppressor. We need to begin to educate them. Recommendation number 8, that the State Education Department work with all school districts and colleges and universities to develop and implement effective recruitment programs to increase the number of cultures represented in their faculties and in staffs. And number 9, that the Commissioner of Education give his curriculum report the greatest possible attention and widest possible circulation to key individuals in the state of New York. That is part of our recommendation number 2. And then recommendation number 3 that we bring before you this afternoon is a recommendation to you, the public, the parents, the educators, the legislators, to become active in multicultural education and curriculum of inclusion in New York City. Just because we have an African American who is president of the board, a Latino who is presently the chancellor of New York City, and an African American mayor We could not sit back and think that they're going to do the job that needs to be done for our children. We must apply the pressure consistently and continually, and if we don't do that, then what we get is what we deserve. Too often we sit back and wait and think somebody else is going to do the job for us. We must make our presence known at the Board of Education meetings. You must go out. You must testify at those meetings. You must make your presence known on issues that affect our children. In terms of multicultural education, there's an Office of Multicultural Education. I am the chairperson of the Multicultural Advisory Board. We are looking for people to write curriculum on a per-session basis if you are a teacher, on a consultant basis if you are not. We need your help and your support to get the work that needs to be done for our children. And then the third thing on that issue is that we need to make sure that whatever it is that we're doing for the children of this city, that we do it together. We need your support in education. Those of us who are in education every day know that we cannot get the job done by ourselves. And if we don't have people like you who are willing to give up your Saturdays to come out and to hear speeches and to be a part of workshops, if we don't have people like you working to help us, then who do we have? If we can't come to you, the community, to say, look, this is an issue that you need to be on task on, then who can we go to? If we don't have leaders like you that are willing to move outside of your congressional lines and move outside of your city council lines and move outside of your assembly and senate lines, then who can we go to? Our children are dying every day in the school system that presently exists. In order to change it, we need you. We need you to be active, we need you to be vigilant, and we need you to be on task. Thank you.
Trying to tell you, these people really work today in those workshops. And what you are hearing is the results of that hard work. And now, moving along, we'd like to hear from the workshop leader of the decentralization workshop, Dr. Esmeralda Simmons.
We had a small but very, very participatory group of brothers and sisters today that got together to discuss and to come up with recommendations on the decentralization issue. In particular, we were looking at not only the very, very new report and legislation that was issued by Borough President of Manhattan, Ruth Messenger, but we also took a look at some of the history of decentralization, and we were aided by our presenters in that, as well as the work of the Markey Commission that Assemblyman Del Toro had responsibility for only last year. And toward that end, I'll cut directly to the recommendations. We have complete alignment regarding the following actions. We recommend that the African American Leadership Summit call for all community school districts to have total governance over their school policy and school contracts and school financing. That they also should have governance over any high schools located within their geographic area. We call for the African American Leadership Summit and all organizations, educational organizations of color in this city, to push for a change in the education law that would restrict voting on community school board districts, for community school boards to parents of children in those school districts. Again, these are recommendations that would obviously have to be discussed by the entire group, but there was substantial power behind all of these recommendations. 4, that we join together with existing organizations and create a African American teachers organization, and include parents of our children in schools and educational activists to lobby on educational issues on a consistent basis, not on an issue-by-issue basis. 4, and this is a biggie, that the African American Leadership Summit, and in particular that the Education Committee, developed a position paper putting forth the African American community's position on how a new governance plan for decentralization of the Central Board, as well as for local community school districts, should operate. And we've also put a time frame in that recommendation that this plan, particularly the outlines of it, should be completed within a 2-week period. 5, that we should center our discussions about any new governance plan and any educational recommendations along an African value-based system. Our recommendations should be based on the child and should be child-centered and child educationally centered, so that we can measure any recommendation in terms of what will the result be in the education of our children. That would bring to different schools and different organizations information about educational issues, governance plans, etc., and particularly our position, and also let people become acquainted with candidates and testing issues that come up for parents on a regular basis. And we should do this in conjunction with existing programs. And finally, that the African American Leadership Summit should organize its own phone bank for the May 4th election to increase in targeted areas, to increase the number of parents that will come out and vote in that election, particularly in those areas which we think may be lost to people that are not concerned with the education of our children. Thank you very much.
I tell you, from listening to the results of these workshops, it certainly seems as though there's enough work for all of us to do. Okay. The next workshop leader that we're going to hear from will be Dr. Lorna Burnett?
No, Jesse Fields, Dr. Jesse Fields.
Dr. Jesse Fields, right, who is the workshop leader for the health workshop. So let's see. Dr. Fields?
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Jesse Fields. I'm a physician and the co-chair of the Health Committee, which is chaired by Councilwoman Clark. I'm also an assistant to Dr. Lenora Fulani. Some of you may be wondering why, or thinking about why there was a health workshop, since it wasn't a major focus of the discussions this morning. I'm glad that there was a health workshop, because there's clearly a relationship between economic development and education and healthcare. First of all, our people will not be able to develop economically or in any way or learn unless they're healthy. So healthcare is very basic, and for me, a #1 priority. The workshop was attended by nurses, physicians, health managers, AIDS educators. The speakers, the presenters at the workshop were Dr. Okafor, who is at Harlem Hospital and who works with Health and Hospitals Corporation, who discussed CommuniCare. And also we were honored to have Dr. Cave join us, who made some remarks about the National Medical Association. The health workshop was very much part of an ongoing process, the ongoing process of the work of the Health Committee of the African American Leadership Conference, which started in October when we initially met. And out of that workshop that was the beginning of the Health Committee a decision was made to look into supporting the National Health Care Bill, which Ron Dellums had been introducing, and figuring out what